What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to On Texas Football. My name is CJ Vogel. I'm joined today by Gerry Hamilton for the recruiting breakdown. This afternoon, we're going to be talking a little bit of Texas and Texas A&M. The Lone Star Showdown is back, not only on the field, but on the recruiting side of things as well. And that's what we're going to dive into today. But before we dive into anything further, Gerry, can you please tell us about our good friend Mark Saunders?
Yeah, the recruiting breakdown, our sole sponsor of the recruiting breakdown is Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders. When it comes to protecting all your stuff, wouldn't it be great to have one place that protects it all? Here's some good news. Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders is the only insurance agent you need to help keep tabs on protection for all your stuff, all of it, everything from your home, your car, and your boat to your motorcycle, your RV, and even your ATV. Call Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders' office today at 512-218-8571. Are you in good hands? With over 35 years of experience, you will be with Texas alum Mark Saunders. Give him a call today, 512-218-8571. Thank you very much to Mark Saunders, All-State agent, for being the sole sponsor of the recruiting breakdown.
Well, there's a lot to talk about now. Texas and A&M are recruiting on the same foothold now. Both are heading into the SEC. I guess Texas is joining the SEC, but that will lead us to a lot of conversations and battles between which recruits Texas and A&M will battle with. And both are coming off of junior days we saw over the last 2 weeks of January. Most recently, Texas A&M had a pretty solid list of guys on campus. And we'll start with the offensive side of the ball because that's kind of where –
Hey, before we get going on that, I want to lay this out a little bit, CJ. This will be my 23rd year in the business. When I got into this business, CJ was a little tyke, right? He was opening cabinets when he wasn't supposed to, right? But when I got into this business, Texas and Texas A&M, that rivalry carried over from the field to recruiting 24/7, 365. You can go down the line of prospects from the state of Texas and think about some of those great recruiting battles. And it wasn't just recruiting battles, A&M versus Texas. Go back to when Vince Young and Reggie McNeil came out of high school the same year. The arguments from the Texas side and the A&M side were who was the better quarterback, who is going to be the better quarterback. Then you have specific recruitments that were so impactful. And what was the first thing Matt Brown did when he got to Texas? He started winning recruiting battles against R.C. Slocum. And that was massive for the Longhorns. So what have we missed the last decade? We've missed the rivalry in the state of Texas that carries over to recruiting. And I think that's impacted kids in this state negatively. I think A&M and Texas playing again is so big for recruiting in this state because what we've missed is for 365 days a year, 364, talking about next year's game. That's the water cooler talk. That's everything, your friends, your neighbors, the A&M flags, the Texas flags in the neighborhood. We've missed all these conversations. Now we got it back. So now let's talk about Sark versus Elko in the 25 class and moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly ready to take this debate and hypotheticals off of Twitter and onto the field. You know, this is the most exciting moment I've had since I was about 14. So really exciting for me to get to witness it finally in which I can fully understand what goes on behind the scenes in recruiting as well. That'll be interesting. But A&M hosted a junior day the last weekend of January. They had a big day. I wouldn't necessarily, it was as big as what Texas hosted, obviously 120 plus prospects, but they had some notable names there, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. You know, Jordan Davidson, you had the Bridgeland offensive tackles, Jonte Newman, Ryan Foji, Tyler Thomas, Ty Haywood as well, Kelshawn Johnson, Kalik Lockett. A lot of names there that sound familiar to what Texas has done. Gerry, I want you to kind of break that down from what you saw and also where some of these battles are going to come down to from the offensive side of the ball here.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is huge because A&M has to do – they can't miss on evaluations in 25. And I know that's putting a lot of pressure on a program and a new staff, but they come into a situation at A&M where they have to win some battles on the offensive line, right? And it's a great year in the state of Texas on the offensive line. And A&M and Texas are going to end up going head-to-head. And that doesn't mean Oklahoma's not involved. We talk about Michael Fasusi, the five-star offensive tackle, left tackle, Louisville. He was on campus at A&M the 13th. He didn't go to Texas on the 20th. He went to Missouri. Obviously, he didn't make the Oregon trip. But Oklahoma and Texas were the two favorites throughout the season. I think Texas was a little ahead of Oklahoma. Now A&M gets them on campus. So, right, this sets up the spring and summer official visits for Fasusi. That's Texas versus A&M versus Oklahoma. And I know we're talking more Texas versus A&M today, Elko versus Sark, but there's going to be some battles on the offensive line. And A&M absolutely has to win some of these battles. And on the Texas flip side, you want to keep winning the key battles to keep that talent level as high as it is in the program right now. And Texas is looking at a 5-man offensive line class in 2025. So they're going to have to win some of these in-state battles. I mean, you go down the list, Jonte Newman at Bridgeland is a big one. With Foji committing from Bridgeland to Oklahoma, that was one that A&M and Texas both really liked. So then you go to Jackson Christian, the guard out of Port Neches Groves, who plays tackle but probably projects the guard. A&M, the new staff came in and offered him. Texas Flood had been on him a long time. He was at both places in January again. So that's out of that A&M. That kind of that Port Neches Groves more of an A&M area than Texas area, even though Rashawn Johnson did come out of Port Neches. I'm talking traditionally through the years. Obviously, the head coach there, Coach Joseph, was an A&M graduate assistant coach. That means Jackson Christian's going to A&M. But there are ties everywhere in the state of Texas, these schools. So offensive line is going to be huge because Texas wants to keep their foothold, and it's going to be a 5-man class more than likely. A&M has to win some key battles. And then you have Bill Beadenball north of the Red River, who's going to win his share of battles too. So offensive line sets up big. Wide receivers so interesting, CJ. Kelshawn Johnson's a Texas lean from Hitchcock, the speedster, the playmaker. I call him a poor man Xavier Worthy, and that's a compliment to Kelshawn Johnson. I think Xavier Worthy's just a little ahead from a football standpoint because Kelshawn's a 3-sport guy who's never really trained fully at football, but once he does, watch out. So I think Texas leads A&M there. Khalil Lockett's an interesting name to me, though, CJ, because he didn't attend the Texas January 20 Junior Day. He did go to A&M, but Steve Sarkisian and Chris Jackson, Steve Sarkisian stopped by the school last week over there in Garland, Saxe High. That tells you how much the staff likes Khalil Lockett, that he didn't come to the Junior Day, yet Sark spent valuable time at the end of January going by the high school to meet with Khalil Lockett. So he's an interesting name. Will Texas get him on campus in the spring? I think that March 22nd area is when you're going to start seeing Texas get some guys on campus. Then Jordan Davison's interesting because Jordan Davison looked all season like it was headed to Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon. A&M got him on campus. Oregon got him on campus. Alabama's going to be in that mix, with the new staff. They'll be back in the mix. But it'll be so interesting to see where this recruitment goes. I mean, Texas, Tashard Choice, Sark have been in on this one for well over a year. And they, at point in time, have been the leader of this. You just kind of wonder with Texas taking 2 backs, then taking 2 backs in each class. Does it catch up with them on somebody at some point? But getting Davidson back on campus January 20th is huge. I think he'll be back for an official visit in June. So there's a number of guys. I mean, we could go down the list of offensive guys. I mean, there's a lot, but I'll tell you what's going to be interesting is what we talk about next, CJ. That's defense, because there's a lot of head-to-head battles or a lot of guys Texas and A&M offered the same guys on defense.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance on the trenches on the offensive side of the ball. It's looking like the defensive side of the ball in the trenches on the defensive line is going to be just as important. You can add in the linebacking group as well with Elijah Bo Barnes and Riley Pettijohn. But to me, you're talking about one of the deeper classes that we've seen at the defensive line position in recent memory in the state of Texas. And now with Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M, specifically the Lone Star teams duking it out for some of these top in-state prospects. You're talking about Zion Williams, Floyd Guidry, Chase Sims, Xavier Pono, Landon Rink, and you can even throw in Lance Jackson because of his relation. Obviously, his father played basketball at A&M. It's going to be a bloodbath in the trenches, as you would expect in a given year. This year, a little bit more of a heightened, expectation here as a result of both teams going to the SEC and the state having such of a plethora of in-state talent right now.
And let's add another one, Brandon Brown, the Texas 4-star commitment out of O'Galley. So we got to go outside the state a little bit too. Sean Spencer was recruiting Brandon Brown at the University of Florida. Obviously, he's now the D-line coach at A&M. He was by O'Galley High in January, just like Sarkisian, Jeff Banks, Tashard Choice were. Brandon Brown camped at A&M last year, didn't visit Texas. Texas, from everything I was told, was actually his dream school. He likes the idea of being in Texas. Does that mean he's absolutely going to sign with Texas in the state of Texas? It doesn't. There's a long way to go in recruiting. But he's a solid commitment right now to Texas. He's supposed to be visit in late March around the 7-on-7 tournament in the Austin area. But we got to flip the script. A&M has to do well on the offensive line in 25. Texas has to do well on the defensive line in 25. That means you're in battles. Zion Williams, you mentioned. I mean, just some of those offers. Landon Rink's been to both places, plus Oklahoma. Floyd Guidry, recently offered by A&M, was attended Texas Junior Day and met with Sark, which took that to another level right after Bo Davis had offered before he went to LSU. LSU's now in there. LSU's also in on Zion Williams, by the way. You got some great battles coming. Then there's Dillon Battle, speaking of recruiting battles. Does A&M get in on Dillon Battle? Sarkisian and Kenny Baker were by the school at Mansfield Timberview last week. A&M's offered Dillon Battle. So I think there's more than 50 offers right now, whether they're committable or not, that A&M and Texas have made to the same prospects. And when you look at D-line, just like A&M has to hit on offensive linemen in 25, Texas has to hit on defensive linemen. And you're talking about a 3 or 4 man class. They have to keep Brandon Brown in the fold. And obviously A&M is one of the many schools chasing there. But yeah, defensive line's imperative. And I know we'll hit on linebackers a little bit, but Lance Jackson's interesting, right? Because we learned through Landon Jackson's recruitment that his father, Larry, played basketball at Texas A&M, right? So one kid goes to LSU, then Arkansas, and now Lance is committed to the University of Texas. Obviously, A&M would have loved to have Lance Jackson. And A&M won't give up. They'll try to make another run at that. But Lance is a pretty firm commitment to the University of Texas right now. But CJ, then I'll lead you into it. Linebacker. I mean, there's a lot of guys here who I'm not sure A&M's maybe top 2 battling Texas for a Riley Pettijohn or Elijah Barnes, but there with that new staff, they're trying to get in there and be one of those 2 or 3 schools to get in those battles the rest of spring and June.
Specifically with Mike Elko now being the defensive-minded coach at A&M, it's easier to recruit defensive side of the ball just a little bit. But with the 2 that you mentioned, obviously the jewels right now in the class. You could toss Jonah Williams back in the mix as well at linebacker, though Texas has bumped him back out to safety. Blake Gideon's taking control of that recruitment as of lately. But you start looking down the list. If Texas misses on one of their 2 top targets, where else do they go? Obviously, they have a commitment in the fold already with Anthony Williams. A&M over the weekend gained a commitment from Kelvion Riggins out of North Forney as well. So the linebacking room is starting to take shape for both schools. Where do you go from there? Is it a Javar Thomas? Do you keep moving down the list?
Jonathan Cunningham. Yep.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of really talented in-state prospects. And we've talked about Texas going for those long wingspan, long levered linebackers with Johnny Nansen now in the fold. Does A&M follow suit with their philosophies? That'll be interesting. Obviously, I don't think anybody is shying away from the recruitment of Bo Barnes and Pettijohn. So a lot to go into perspective here on the defensive side of the ball. But Jerry, I wanted to kind of switch it up a little bit. I wanted to ask you, with the emergence of Coach Elko in College Station, there's a kind of a restart to what A&M has had to do and what they will do on the recruiting side of things. Texas is now in their conference. There's no more, we have the SEC logo on their chest and they do not. If you're Coach Elko, how important is it to win early on in 24 for your recruiting class, not only this year, but moving on?
Yeah, I think the product on the field may be as important as the win total. And look, you need to get to a 7-8 win area, because especially with Texas ascending, see what happens with Oklahoma. Both of those move into the SEC makes recruiting in Texas more difficult for A&M. There's no doubt about it. And the timing couldn't be worse for A&M to hire a new coach, because Sark just went to the playoffs. Quinn Ewers is coming back. Arch Manning. I mean, 3 straight top 6 recruiting classes, obviously. But look, it's so interesting to me on the staff. Trooper Taylor, years of experience in recruiting in Texas. You could see Trooper and Tashard Choice go head-to-head a little bit. Holman Wiggins, who obviously was the wide receivers coach on staff at Alabama when Sark, Jeff Banks, Flood were all at Bama. Holman did not come to Texas when Sarkisian was hired there. He stayed on Alabama. A guy that's recruited the state of Texas for multiple years now, right? So, I mean, those are some names. Then Sean Spencer, I mentioned, right? Florida was recruiting more in Texas. He's got some of those connections to players as well, and he's going to be a central figure in recruiting in 2025, just like Kenny Baker is. Both schools have a new D-line coach, so they're now going to be going head-to-head on a number of guys. And when you look at a guy like Zion Williams, Jamarcus McFarland's a name you're going to hear. His uncle, who's the former Lufkin standout, who's a Texas OU battle, who's not a TCU D-line coach. But A&M has to have a level of success early. I think it's the product on the field and what the parents and the kids see as the culture. And I think culture is an overused term, CJ, but I think it was bad at A&M. So when people go visit A&M, when high school coaches maybe go up there for a coaching day at A&M, do they see a shift there? Because Sark's shift at Texas was huge. I think in the way people viewed where the program can go, how far it could ascend, and how successful it was to be set up successfully annually, continually. So I think that's what Elko has in front of him, because the initial right now is, oh man, Mike Elko was hired and all these guys left. Well, they were going to leave regardless, some of those guys, but I think some of those losses were positive for the culture. So it's the product you put on the field. How do you present that vision for your program? And how quickly do people see the change on the field, just the product, and then in the locker room? And what players recruit players? A&M's got to have players recruiting players under Mike Elko.
I thought what you mentioned about the culture being really an important part of this recruiting cycle. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Texas's culture and how it feels like each time there's an update, it's been an increase in morale. It's been an increase in player-led activity. A&M over the last 2 cycles, maybe not along that same path. We'll see if that changes under Elko. I think the expectation is that it will. But I wanted to dive deeper into that coaching staff because you mentioned it a little bit there. It feels like when Texas needs a big dog in recruiting, they send in, a Jeff Banks, a Tashard Choice. Obviously, Sarkisian will get involved as well. For A&M, who is that guy? Who is their ace up the sleeve that, if they need to go win a 5-star guy out of state, whether it be a position battle or not, who are they going to send in and say, all right, go clean it up, go bring him home?
Trooper Taylor has a lot of SEC experience, right? I mean, years and years of SEC experience. He's recruited the entire region. They may not have a Jeff Banks who you would look to on that staff. I think it's going to be more of a collective effort with that staff. Obviously, it was interesting that when Wesley McGriff took the job for about a week, I said, okay, that's interesting. Wesley McGriff, a lot like Trooper Taylor, had a lot of experience. Then he left. The young safeties coach is popular with players. Right. And so now he's really getting into true SEC battles, kind of like Kenny Baker. I mean, the safeties coach has a little more experience than Kenny Baker in those recruitments, but still, this is new. I mean, this is new because now Oklahoma and Texas are in the SEC. It's a different message and different recruitment you're getting into. So I don't know if A&M has that established guy yet. Holman Wiggins, I think, is a solid relationship builder. The term rainmaker is used in recruiting a lot. That's not what he is. And obviously, anytime you leave Alabama, Nick Saban was the closer. So you always have something to prove, which adds a little motivation. But I'm not sure they have the one go-to guy necessarily. I think it's going to be as a collective staff, which I think makes that vision, that product on the field, and the feeling overall high school coaches who are still involved in recruiting at some level, the parents and the kids get when they're on campus.
Certainly. And there's a long way to go until November 30th when these teams finally meet up on the field for the first time. And
but see, 40 kids committed to these programs by the time that game.
Right.
I mean, that's the great thing is the build up to the game is going to be what we're covering in recruiting for the next few months.
No, it's going to be a blast. I'm excited it's back. If there's one other thing that Texas fans should be wary of about Texas A&M's recruiting efforts as it stands right now, is there anything off the top of your head that says, you know what, early on, they've done a very good job in this aspect?
I think getting kids to campus. What I think Mike Elko did was they tried to get kids to campus January 13th. They had a few guys there, Fasusi, Landon Rink, some of those guys. And that kind of gave away, okay, they really like these guys. They're trying to get them in front of the A&M staff early to kind of make an impression on them before they go hit the Texas and the OU junior days after that. So I think A&M's done a good job getting players to campus in short order. I think, look, Mike Elko has, when Steve Sarkisian came in to Texas, he had to repair some relationships maybe that Tom Herman had left in the dust, so to speak. I think it's similar with Jimbo Fisher and versus what Mike Elko's dealing with. So I think those trips to high schools in January were so important because I do think there were some repairs that had to be made there. So how quickly does that happen? I think A&M's doing the right things. I think they're attacking it the right way. Now the question is, How many of those guys do you get back on campus again for the spring practice, then ultimately for June official visits? Where is A&M's June official big visit weekend? How are those kids situated versus Texas? We know Texas is going to get a lot of those last weekend in June official visitors. They're going to win that battle. They have momentum. They went to the playoff. They're moving to the SEC. They're about to be able to celebrate 6 picks in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Texas has a lot of momentum on the recruiting trail. How does A&M combat that both in spring and then with June official visits? I think A&M is going to try to get guys on campus first and try to make their hay, put some hay in the barn on some certain guys before those Texas visits happen.
I think you're right. I think it'll be an early aggressive attack for most of these prospects before they're able to take other visits. But Jared, we're finally able to the year where we can say, there's a winner and a loser now between Texas and A&M. That's exciting. Again, the recruiting aspects of things, the dominoes that will fall later down the road will certainly have a lot of implications on what happens on that field November 30th down in Kyle Field. But for now, we can only hope and wait and, get down to the nitty-gritty essentially in recruiting. So that has just about done it for the recruiting breakdown today on Texas football. I'm CJ Vogel and joined by Gerry Hamilton again today. Thank you, Gerry, for joining us. You can find all of our latest recruiting updates on ontexasfootball.com. Until the next time, welcome.